Afternoon, everyone. It's Robert Josek here from OneKloudX. I'm pleased to have you all join today. This is a very quick session. It's going to be an hour of going through some of the major features that have come out in the, or are coming out in the 2022.1 release of NetSuite. So let's wait a couple of minutes for others to join. I can see we have a total of 5 people at the moment. So what I've tried to do is, based on the registrants, I have tried to go through some of the applicable changes and new features that are coming out that may be specific or you could potentially utilize. So let me get started. The numbers are increasing, so I'll get started because it's, like I said, it's a very quick session. Any questions that you have, please plug them into the actual into the message on the side, and I've got Terry Ann, who is also with us to answer these questions because I can't see my screen as to who's asking questions because I'm going through the presentation that I'm taking you through today. So without further ado, I will share my screen. And I'll go through all the new features. So starting off with, there's electronic bank payment changes that have been made in the 2022.1 release. So what they've done is they've allowed for, at a particular entity level, so for instance, a vendor, to actually have a selection of a bank account to be entered at a transaction level. So for instance, for a particular vendor bill, you may want, the supplier may want the payment to go to a different bank account compared to all the other transactions. So as part of the 2022, they've updated the transactions like bills, bill credits, bill payments, commissions, expense reports to actually have these transactions divert to a separate bank account that sits on the vendor record that can be either primary or secondary. And as part of that, they've introduced a new suitelet to handle the processing of these particular bill payments. So if you have these transactions tagged to go to a separate vendor or a separate bank account for that transaction, this is the actual new EFT global bill payment processing solution that NetSuite have. Compared to if you're still wanting to use the same, there's always one bank account to make payments, then the current bill payment processing page does not change. You continue to use that. This is just for those payments that you want to divert to other accounts where you will use this particular EFT global bill payment processing page. One other great thing, and I know this would be fantastic for one particular customer who always has PFAs always stuck in the queue, so this actually is a fix for that, where they introduced a new script that is a scheduled script that you can either run daily or trigger it as you'd like, or it actually goes and reprocesses those stuck PFAs in that queue. So this is a new feature that's come out, or a new fix that's come out. So that covers the payment side of it. From a fixed assets perspective, they've added additional diagnostic enhancements to the actual FAM Diagnostic portlet that you can apply to your dashboard. So over here, you've got the ones that were released a couple years ago, where you're able to reset the asset values, run a scan on those, check any missing summaries, and the like. And now they've actually introduced a couple of other new elements where with assets that don't have particular values to them, you're able to identify those assets, or any ones that don't have any contracts pertaining to lease payments. Those ones will also get flagged. And then there's a way of resolving and fixing those where you are able to upload those relevant asset values into this templated CSV that's provided for you. And then you can upload those into NetSuite as well without having to manually go and update those. So that's some of the elements around the fixed asset component. One other area, now if you're a company that has multi-subsidiaries, and I know a few of you do, what they've introduced is additional functionality pertaining to the intercompany transaction pairing. So where you have a company buying something from another NetSuite company, those elements have been further enhanced to connect those transactions. So where they've taken it to, so in addition to what you've been able to do around pairing non-inventory invoices and bills, they've now also allowed for the ability to pair non-inventory credit memos and vendor credits as well, coupled with some enhancements around the pairing that I'll walk you through now. So obviously, if you've got intercompany transactions, obviously you're able to customize your form to define those particular transactions that you can pair. Now, like I mentioned, you can pair all those other transactions as well. And from that, you're able to then use the analytics to look at those individual pairings as well, to see how those ones are connected in terms of the AP and the AR on both sides of the actual subsidiaries. And then what they've also introduced is the ability to now net off these relevant intercompany transactions. So in this example here, you've got accounts payable for a check subsidiary, for accounts receivable on the check sub as well. And you're able to therefore net the relevant transactions between those two different subsidiaries. We've suggested netting as well, where the solution is able to define those relevant netting to connect those transactions up. And then when you've actually netted them, there's an approval process you can push it through as well. And then once they're actually netted, there is now a netting settlement document that gets created for each and every one of those individual elements, where you can therefore go in and view those individual netting settlements for those subsidiaries. And as part of that, you can also see the actual netting settlement transactions sitting against the relevant transactions in NetSuite as well. So if you'd like to net particular transactions between subsidiaries processing, now you have the feature to be able to do those in NetSuite. From an intercompany costing standpoint, just a very small change. So if you, in the item record, decide you want to change the assets or the cost of good accounts, what happens is when you go to save it, you'll end up getting an error message saying that, are you okay to proceed? Because actually it's going to try to update every historical transaction with those relevant new updated accounts. So what NetSuite's done in this new release is actually giving you functionality to update a set on the accounting preferences, update a particular field that does not update the cost of goods and the asset accounts on these existing transactions. So it's only for new transactions that are entered. Historical transactions will still maintain the existing cost of good and asset accounts. So that's a new feature I think 600 customers globally have been asking for, and this is why it's in this current release. So I hope that makes sense. Other than that, that's all there is in the inventory costing side of it. So from a Workbooks analytics standpoint, as you see, every release, NetSuite's always adding new features and functions to the analytics that complements the dashboard reporting components that are in NetSuite. So what they've done is they've incorporated calculated measures now, so you can have calculated measures added to that can calculate the calculations between two key values of an actual of a report. So for instance, an example could be where you want to sum the purchase price multiplied, the purchase price multiplied by the quantity sum will give you the total sum. So you're able to create these very quick calculated measures on the fly, as well as percentage margin examples, and they're easily able to be saved on a relevant workbook and shared as well. So that's what they've continued to enhance. They've also enhanced the conditional formatting elements. So there was conditional formatting there, but now they've actually incorporated some additional icons that you can include as part of the rules that kind of mirrors what is now in the saved searches within NetSuite. And then as part of the workbooks as well, there's been a lot of instances where it could crunch and take a lot of time for these particular reports to run. So what they've done is they've now enabled you to have the ability to select whether or not you're utilizing the cache data or whether this report is actually real time or the like. So you have that now, that functionality, and also in the back end, you also have the ability to also choose only to update based on any deltas as well. The other element which I know is going to be great and it's continuously evolving is the data set linking aspect of workbooks in NetSuite. So this is where you're able to link certain workbooks, certain data sets within an analytics that connects different transaction types or record types to therefore be able to drag them together, which where Save Searches tends to sometimes lack a little bit of luster when it comes to that perspective. The only thing is you need to do a small script to connect these at the moment, but I'm hearing in the next release or two, they will have functionality to be able to create these using the UI and connect the data within it, which is going to be a game changer. So from an actual supply chain control standpoint, so these are all the relevant supply chain changes that are coming in, particularly because of the level of supply chain shocks that we've all been having as a result of COVID, and therefore disruptions in the supply chain. So what they've spent their time looking at is vendor performance, and they've continuously keep adding functionality around being able to predict, or the system to be able to predict days late and days early on future purchases based on historical transactions that have been entered. So there, you still have there is a vendor performance calculation dashboard component that you can add to your dashboard and look at those related to every single vendor. And you can also see it also on the vendor record as well. But in addition to that, what they've done is that now any single time there is a change, or every single time that there is a purchase order that's been receipted, or there's an activity on a purchase order, what happens is that now these vendor delivery performance updates get saved into the actual system notes now, which enables you to report on those. So if there are differences between how the vendor is tracking this month versus last month, and you want to report on those differences, you now have the ability to do that with the solution as of 2022.1, and add those to relevant reminders as well in your dashboard when you need to look at certain performance on vendors. The other thing as well is when you're placing purchase orders now, they've actually incorporated a vendor performance selection right underneath the actual vendor field on the purchase order. That will there take you to the actual vendor performance, so you can look at for that particular, for any selected vendor or any multiple vendors based on a particular view that you've got, you're able to see that performance and then be able to select the vendor based on that view as well. So that's a cool little feature that they've added. And then on top of that, they've also incorporated the vendor element around ordering items as well. So you can look at the actual performance of the vendor on the actual item as well. So if you're in the order items page doing reorders, or on the what's it called, when you're entering your what's it called, through a supply chain solution, you also have the ability to then jump into the item, look at the vendors based on that item, and look at the actual performance of those vendors against that particular item as well, and select the vendor from there. So that's the other new part they've added. And as well as that, if you've got purchase order approval processes, which I know a few of you do, you also have the ability to get predictions now when a purchase order is a pending approval stage, that will therefore show you the actual performance and the predicted risks of that particular vendor now before you actually approve that purchase order. So these are some of the features they've added into the supply chain aspect. And then if we move into the supply allocation standpoint, I'm not sure how many of you are using the NetSuite supply allocation. So to give you a bit of a rundown on that perspective, because I know a few of you are beginning to look at it. So what this does is it actually enables you to manage your supply against the relevant demand in NetSuite. So if you've got a lot of sales orders that are fighting for the limited amount of stock, you have the ability to manage these allocations based on particular rules in NetSuite, and therefore be able to manage those particular rules and also manage the allocations within NetSuite using the supply chain control tower solution. Or you're able to look at these individually, whether it's on a purchase order or on a sales order, manage those supply allocations as well. So this is where you're able to go in to the supply chain snapshot transaction and look at the particular allocated inventory against the relevant sales orders in the actual view of the supply chain snapshot. And on the flip side, also look at it from a supply plan perspective or supply perspective as well, you can look at the actual where the supply is actually going to as well, and where you can relocate particular inventory that's coming into relevant sales orders. So that's on the supply chain side of things. From a supply planning side of things, they're continuously improving and adding functionality to supply planning area, where specifically they're adding more functionality to the workbench, to the supply planning workbench. So this is the solution that is superseding the old time-phased supply planning functionality in NetSuite. So as part of it, they've actually added preset filters and item save searches in order to be able to have better ways of restricting the data and filtering the data based on what you're trying to look at from a planning perspective. So they've included this particular transaction called Planning Workbench View, where you can create a particular view based on a saved search that could be either for a group of items or can be either for a group of vendors, and therefore you're able to filter and manage based on what particular supplier you want to see in the actual workbench as well. So once you've actually created those, including the saved searches, you'll therefore see a new filter at the top called the Planning Workbench View. They're able to then filter on it, and therefore the data that's shown will incorporate the aspects that that you've therefore created around from the filter perspective, whether it's a supply type, whether it's relevant vendors you're filtering, and the like. The other thing they've added as well is they've also added the actual vendor column into the planning workbench as well, so you can actually see which vendors are pertaining to the planned purchase orders that NetSuite is generating, as well as the item descriptions as well at both the demand and supply plan, demand and the supply sub-tabs. So when you're looking at the supply for relevant items, in terms of what the purchases that have been generated based on the execution of MRP in NetSuite, that will therefore show you the items now, and also on the demand side as well. They've added to the actual grid view the safety stock column now, which wasn't there in the previous release. And at the same time, they've also now included a set of selections on the planning period size. So I think previously when they first launched this, you were only able to look at this in days, but now you can also look at it in weeks and months as well. And then the other thing, which I know would be, which is where a lot of customers have been asking for, is especially with the issues around the supply chain, where they don't want the system now to generate certain planned purchases, because we know that there's issues in the supply chain and we can't do anything about it. So now you have the option of excluding transactions from the supply plan, and therefore selecting that you just have to go into the customized form, add the exclude from supply plan tick, and therefore when you execute the MRP within NetSuite, therefore will exclude those transactions from the mix. So that's all I had today. I know it's 18 minutes of me talking, and if you have any questions, please ask them now, and I'll do my best to answer them. One thing to know is that within NetSuite, you're able to look at your release notes, and also as part of the release notes, there are some great videos that have been done by NetSuite pertaining to all the bits of functionality. So a lot of the slides you're seeing today have come from those presentations, and then if you can see how these actual components have been set up, how they're being used, and the like. I can't unfortunately show you some of the other elements because they're still coming out. So for instance, the Cash 360 dashboard is coming out in the next month, I'm hearing. The same with the project dashboard. If you're a services-based company, they're actually updated the actual the dashboard elements pertaining to those in terms of what you can view now as well. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'll wait a couple minutes. But yeah, that's all I've got for today. I've actually flown through it. I wasn't expecting to go this fast because I knew I had a good chunk of slides to go through. So what I'll do is to everyone that's in the group, we'll get Terry Ann to send you the deck, so you've got it. But like I said, the videos up in NetSuite on the release notes are actually pretty good, and and a lot of them are self-explanatory and relatively easy to set up as well. So if you don't have any questions, I'll wrap this up. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the week, whatever's left of it for you. Thank you.